The Maldives appeared beneath our plane like scattered pearls on blue silk. Sarah pressed her face against the window, and I watched her eyes light up with that childlike wonder I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. Her hand found mine across the armrest, squeezing gently. After 20 years of marriage, we were finally here. Our dream destination. The place we'd pinned to our vision board when we were just two broke kids sharing a cramped apartment in Chicago. "Can you believe it, Jack?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We actually made it." I couldn't help but smile, remembering all those extra shifts at the construction site, the careful budgeting, the sacrifices we'd both made to save for this moment. Sarah had worked countless weekend shifts at the hospital, picking up every overtime opportunity she could. Now, looking at her profile against the tropical backdrop, I knew every hour of hard work had been worth it. The resort exceeded even our wildest expectations. Our water villa stood on stilts above the crystal-clear lagoon, with glass floor panels revealing tropical fish swimming beneath our feet. The first evening, we sat on our private deck, sharing a bottle of champagne as the sun painted the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink. Sarah seemed different here, more relaxed, more present. The constant tension she'd been carrying in her shoulders for the past few months had melted away. "Remember when we used to look at pictures of places like this online?" She leaned back in her chair, barefoot and beautiful in her flowing summer dress. "It seemed so impossible then." "Nothing's impossible with you," I replied, meaning every word. We'd built our life together from scratch, supporting each other through college, career changes, and the loss of both my parents. Sarah had been my rock through it all. The first few days passed in a blur of snorkeling, couples massages, and romantic dinners under the stars. We fell into an easy routine. Breakfast on our deck, morning swims, lazy afternoons reading in the shade. Sarah took endless photos of everything. The exotic birds, the spectacular sunsets, the elaborate breakfast spreads. She seemed especially focused on documenting every moment, as if trying to preserve something precious. Looking back now, I should have noticed the subtle signs. The way she'd sometimes grow distant during dinner, her mind seemingly elsewhere. How she'd spend long moments staring at her phone with an unreadable expression. The hushed conversation I overheard one morning when I returned early from my swim. But happiness has a way of blinding us to things we don't want to see. And I was happy, deliriously, completely happy. On our fourth night, we attended a beach barbecue with other guests. The resort had set up tables on the sand, with tiki torches casting warm light over the gathering. Sarah wore a new dress she'd bought specifically for the trip, white linen that made her tan glow. She was the most beautiful woman there, drawing admiring glances from other guests. We danced barefoot in the sand to live music, her head resting on my shoulder just like it had at our wedding. "I love you," she whispered against my neck. Was there a tremor in her voice? A hint of something that should have warned me? Memory plays tricks on us, coloring past moments with the knowledge of what's to come. But in that moment, all I felt was profound gratitude for this woman who'd chosen to share her life with me. That night, we made love with the sound of gentle waves providing nature's symphony. Sarah clung to me with an intensity that felt almost desperate. Afterward, she cried, just a few quiet tears that she quickly wiped away, blaming it on too much wine and overwhelming happiness. I held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling like the luckiest man alive. If I had known what the next few days would bring, would I have held her tighter? Would I have asked the questions I was too content to consider? Or would I have run as far as I could from this paradise that was about to become my personal hell? I woke before sunrise on our fifth day, the ocean breeze carrying the salt-sweet scent of tropical flowers through our open windows. Sarah's side of the bed was empty, but that wasn't unusual. She'd always been an early riser. I found her note on the bathroom mirror, written in her familiar, flowing script. Gone for an early yoga session. Meet you at breakfast. Love you. The resort's breakfast pavilion was quiet when I arrived, just a few other guests scattered among the tables. I chose our usual spot overlooking the lagoon, ordered coffee, and waited. The sun climbed higher, painting golden paths across the water. 1 hour passed, then another. Sarah's coffee grew cold, untouched. I pulled out my phone to text her, only to find a message already waiting. Session running long. Having breakfast with some people from class. See you at the beach later? Something about the casual tone felt off, like a wrong note in a familiar song. Sarah had always hated eating breakfast without me. It was our thing, our sacred morning ritual, since our first apartment together. The yoga instructor looked confused when I stopped by the wellness center. We don't have morning sessions on Wednesdays, she said, adjusting her mat. But your wife did attend yesterday's class. She seemed to really connect with some of the other guests. A small knot formed in my stomach, but I pushed it away. This was our dream vacation. Sarah was probably just making friends, breaking out of her usual routine. Wasn't that what vacations were for? Still, I found myself walking the resort's winding paths, searching for a glimpse of her familiar silhouette. I finally spotted her at the far end of the beach, sitting at the resort's secondary restaurant. She wasn't alone. A small group occupied the table, 3 women and 2 men, all laughing at something I couldn't hear. Sarah's head was thrown back in laughter, her hand resting casually on the arm of the man beside her. She looked radiant, but somehow different, like a version of my wife I'd never met. As I approached, Sarah's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Jack! She stood quickly, creating distance between herself and her companion. Everyone, this is my husband. The introductions felt rushed, names bleeding into each other. The man she'd been sitting next to, Mark or Mike, I couldn't quite catch it, gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We met at yoga yesterday, Sarah explained, her voice carrying a slight tremor I'd never heard before. They're staying in the overwater villas, too. Isn't it amazing how you can form such quick connections on vacation? That evening, Sarah was unusually quiet during dinner. She picked at her food, her mind clearly elsewhere. When I asked about her new friends, her answers were vague, dismissive. Just other couples, she said, shrugging. You know how these resort friendships are. Intense, but temporary. Later, I found her on our deck, staring at her phone in the darkness. The screen's blue light illuminated tears on her cheeks. When I asked what was wrong, she quickly wiped them away. Just missing home, she said, and thinking about how fast time passes. Do you ever wonder if you're living the life you're meant to live? I sat beside her, taking her hand. I'm living exactly the life I want, I said firmly. Right here, with you. She squeezed my hand, but didn't meet my eyes. What if? She started, then stopped. What if we're just comfortable? What if there's more out there, and we're too scared to reach for it? Sarah, I said, turning to face her fully. Talk to me. What's really going on? She stood abruptly, gathering her phone and wrap. Nothing. I'm just tired and emotional. You know how I get. She kissed my cheek, but it felt mechanical, rehearsed. I think I'll take a sleeping pill and turn in early. I stayed on the deck for hours after she went inside, listening to the waves and trying to ignore the growing sense that something was slipping through my fingers. The moon cast a silver path across the water, and I remembered how we used to dream about this place, planning every detail of our perfect getaway. But perfection, I was beginning to realize, could be its own kind of warning sign. The morning light felt different now, somehow harder, more revealing. I watched Sarah's reflection in our villa's bathroom mirror as she applied her makeup, a routine I'd observed countless times over our years together. But today, each gesture seemed like a performance, carefully choreographed. She caught me watching and smiled, but the expression didn't quite reach her eyes, like a photograph that's slightly out of focus. I thought we could try that reef excursion today, I suggested, trying to recapture something of our earlier excitement. The one you were talking about when we first arrived? Sarah's hand paused, mascara wand hovering midair. Oh, I actually made plans to join the others for a cooking class. She didn't meet my eyes in the mirror. You should go, though. You've always loved snorkeling. The others. They had become a constant presence in our paradise, an invisible wall building between us with each passing day. I watched her select a sundress, new, something I hadn't seen before, and wondered when she'd bought it. The Sarah I knew had always shared every purchase with infectious excitement, modeling new clothes like we were still dating. Maybe I'll join the cooking class too, I offered, hating the slight note of desperation in my voice. We could learn together. Her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. It's full, actually. Limited spots. She turned, finally meeting my gaze directly. You seem different lately, Jack. Is everything okay? The question struck me like a physical blow. I was different. I wanted to laugh, or cry, or maybe both. Instead, I forced a smile. Just missing you, I guess. Feels like we're having parallel vacations sometimes. Something flickered across her face. Guilt? Fear? But it was gone before I could name it. Don't be silly, she said, her voice deliberately light. We're together every evening. She kissed my cheek, leaving a trace of her lipstick that I would later find myself unable to wipe away. I spent the morning on our private deck, pretending to read while my mind circled like a shark around memories of our marriage. Had there been signs I'd missed? Changes so gradual they'd been invisible until now? I thought about the past year. Sarah's new yoga routine, her suddenly active social life, the business trips that seemed to multiply. My phone buzzed with a text from her. Class running long. Having lunch with the group. Don't wait up. The casual tone felt like sandpaper against my skin. I scrolled back through our recent messages, noting how they'd grown shorter, more perfunctory. When had "I love you" become "see you later"? The resort suddenly felt too small, suffocating despite the endless horizon. I found myself walking the pristine beaches, past happy couples living out their own paradise fantasies. Near the resort's edge, I spotted Sarah's group at the beachfront bar. They sat close together, heads bent in conversation that stopped abruptly when someone noticed me approaching. Sarah's hand withdrew quickly from where it had been resting near. Mark, I remembered his name now, and her laugh sounded forced, theatrical. Jack, we were just talking about you. One of the women, Lisa or Lena, called out with obvious discomfort. Sarah was telling us about your construction company. Was she? I managed, noting how Sarah seemed to shrink into herself, her earlier vibrancy dimming. And what else has my wife been sharing? The silence that followed stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Sarah stood abruptly, gathering her things. Actually, I'm feeling a bit tired. Think I'll head back to the villa. She touched my arm as she passed, a gesture that once would have felt intimate, but now seemed designed for our audience. I watched her walk away, her white dress gleaming against her tanned skin, and remembered our first date, how she'd spilled coffee on herself and laughed so hard she had to sit down on the sidewalk. The memory felt like it belonged to different people in a different life. That night, I woke to find her side of the bed empty again. Through the glass floor panels, I watched tropical fish dart through the illuminated water below, their movements quick and erratic, like the thoughts I couldn't quiet. Sarah's phone lay on her bedside table, face down. For the first time in our marriage, I felt the urge to pick it up, to search for answers to questions I wasn't sure I wanted to ask. I resisted, but sleep didn't return. Instead, I lay awake, listening to the distant sound of waves and wondering if it was possible to drown in paradise. Sleep had become a distant memory, replaced by endless nights of watching moonlight paint shadows across our villa's walls. Sarah's breathing beside me felt like a lie, too measured, too careful. Sometimes I caught her watching me when she thought I was asleep, her gaze heavy with something I couldn't or wouldn't name. That morning, I found traces of her sand-covered footprints leading back to our villa, evidence of another pre-dawn wandering. The sight triggered a memory from our second year of marriage. Sarah sleepwalking during the weeks after her father's death, her unconscious mind working through grief she couldn't process while awake. But this felt different. These footprints spoke of purpose, of conscious choices made in darkness. At breakfast, she wore sunglasses despite the cloudy morning, picking at a piece of mango with mechanical precision. Her wedding ring caught the light as she lifted her coffee cup, and I remembered the day I'd proposed. How she'd cried, how real those tears had seemed. Now I found myself questioning every memory, every shared moment, like a man trying to separate truth from dreams. We should take that sunset cruise, I suggested, reaching for normalcy like a drowning man grasping at driftwood. The one with the dolphins? It's supposed to be beautiful. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she set down her cup. I can't today. I promised. She stopped, swallowed. I have that spa treatment scheduled, remember? I didn't remember because she hadn't told me. Another small lie in a growing collection. The old Sarah had shared everything, her days spilling out in excited bursts of detail. This new Sarah held her plans close, each activity a carefully guarded secret. Cancel it, I said softly, surprising us both. Please, spend the day with me instead. Something flickered behind her sunglasses. Panic? Guilt? She removed them slowly, and I saw the shadows beneath her eyes, matching my own sleepless nights. Jack, she began, her voice gentle in a way that made my stomach turn. We can't spend every minute together. That's not healthy. Healthy. The word tasted bitter. Like sneaking out before dawn? Like lying about yoga classes? Her face paled, but her voice remained steady. I couldn't sleep. I went for a walk. Since when do you track my movements? Since they stopped making sense, I wanted to say, since you became a stranger wearing my wife's face. Instead, I watched a gecko scurry across the restaurant's bamboo ceiling, its quick movements matching my pulse. Remember our first apartment? I asked suddenly. How the heat would go out every winter, and we'd huddle under all our blankets, making plans for the future? Her expression softened with genuine warmth for the first time in days. The one with the leaky faucet that drove us crazy. She reached across the table, touching my hand. We've come so far since then. Have we? I caught her hand before she could withdraw it, because lately it feels like we're further apart than ever. She pulled away as if burned, knocking over her water glass. As staff rushed to help, I watched her hand shake while dabbing at the spill with her napkin. A message notification lit up her phone screen, Mark's name visible for a moment before she snatched it away. I have to go, she mumbled, gathering her things. The treatment, they'll charge us if I'm late. I spent the afternoon by our private pool, watching clouds build on the horizon. A storm was coming, the air heavy with anticipation. From somewhere down the beach came the sound of laughter. Her laughter, carried on the wind. I closed my eyes, remembering how that sound used to be mine, how it used to mean joy instead of secrets. When she returned that evening, her hair was dry, her skin untouched by spa oils. She didn't offer an explanation, and I didn't ask for one. We ate dinner in silence, the space between us filled with unspoken accusations and unnamed fears. Each clink of silverware felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. That night, I dreamed of our wedding day. But in the dream, when Sarah lifted her veil, a stranger's face smiled back at me. I woke gasping, reaching for her, but her side of the bed was empty again. Through the glass floor, I watched dark shapes move through darker water and wondered how much longer we could pretend this paradise wasn't becoming our own private hell. Paradise has a way of making time feel fluid, days bleeding into nights with the rhythm of endless waves. But now each moment stretched like pulled taffy, sticky with unspoken words and avoided glances. I found myself cataloging every detail of Sarah's movements, as if I could decode the truth through the subtle language of her body. The way she angled herself away from me at breakfast, how her fingers constantly sought her phone like a lifeline to another world. The storm that had been threatening finally broke that morning, turning our crystal-clear lagoon into a churning mess of grays and whites. Lightning split the sky as I watched Sarah dress for another mysterious engagement, her movements precise and deliberate. She'd started using a new perfume, something heavier, more exotic than her usual light floral scent. The kind of scent that lingered in a room long after its wearer had gone. You could stay, I said, my voice barely audible over the rain drumming against our villa's roof. Watch the storm with me, like we used to during those summers at the lake house. Her hands stilled on the buttons of her blouse. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of my Sarah in her reflection. The woman who used to pull me out onto our porch during thunderstorms, claiming the air felt more alive. But then she blinked, and the stranger returned. I can't cancel again, she said, though I couldn't remember her mentioning any plans. They're expecting me. They. Always they. The nameless, faceless group that had become the center of her world, leaving me orbiting the edges of her attention, like a forgotten satellite. I watched her apply lipstick with trembling hands, and suddenly the question I'd been swallowing for days broke free. "Do you remember what you said to me at our wedding?" My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "During our vows?" She froze, lipstick hovering near her mouth. "Jack, please. You said there would never be secrets between us, that we'd always be honest, even when it hurt." I moved behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Were you lying then, or are you lying now?" The lipstick clattered into the sink, leaving a red streak like a wound against the white porcelain. Sarah gripped the counter's edge, her knuckles turning white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I picked up her phone, careful not to unlock it. "Every time I wake up, you're either gone or staring at this thing like it holds the answers to questions I'm afraid to ask." She snatched the phone from my hand, cradling it against her chest like a shield. "You're imagining things. The stress from work, the time change. You're not thinking clearly." "Then unlock it," I challenged softly. "Show me I'm wrong. Show me I'm crazy for feeling like I'm losing my wife in paradise." Thunder cracked overhead, making us both jump. Sarah used the moment to slip past me, gathering her purse with shaking hands. "I don't have to prove anything. You're my husband. You're supposed to trust me." "Trust works both ways, Sarah." She paused at the door, her silhouette framed by the gray light of the storm. For a heartbeat, I thought she might turn back, might finally let the truth spill out between us. Instead, she whispered, "I'll be back for dinner," and disappeared into the rain. I spent hours watching the storm through our villa's windows, each flash of lightning illuminating memories like old photographs. Sarah on our first date, laughing so hard she snorted her drink. Sarah in our tiny first apartment, dancing in her pajamas while making Sunday breakfast. Sarah at her father's funeral, gripping my hand like an anchor in a storm much like this one. When had those clear, sharp memories begun to feel like stories about someone else? How long had we been playing these roles? Devoted husband, loving wife, while something darker grew in the spaces between us. The storm began to ease as afternoon faded into evening. I found myself standing in front of her open suitcase, staring at the unfamiliar clothes she'd packed for this trip. Designers I'd never heard her mention, styles that belonged to someone else's life. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a black dress I'd never seen, its price tag still attached. The cost made my breath catch, more than our monthly mortgage payment, paid from an account I didn't know about. Beneath it, I found a small velvet pouch containing a bracelet. The card attached read simply, "For paradise." The truth was there, waiting to be uncovered like a landmine beneath pristine sand. But I carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, knowing that sometimes the anticipation of pain can hurt worse than the pain itself. Outside, the last rumbles of thunder faded into distance, leaving behind a silence that felt like the space between heartbeats, the moment before everything changes forever. Night descended on our paradise with suffocating weight. Sarah hadn't returned for dinner as promised, her absence filling our villa like smoke. The bracelet I discovered burned in my memory, "For paradise." 4 words that rewrote 20 years of history. I sat in darkness, watching distant lightning illuminate the horizon where the ocean met the sky, each flash revealing a world increasingly unfamiliar. When she finally returned, her feet whispered across the deck's wooden planks like a guilty confession. The scent of rain still clung to the air, mixing with that new perfume she'd begun wearing, the one that made her smell like a stranger. She paused in the doorway, a silhouette caught between 2 worlds. "I thought you'd be asleep," she said softly, her voice carrying that careful neutrality I'd grown to dread. "I thought you'd be at dinner." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I remained motionless in my chair, afraid that if I moved, the fragile shell of our marriage would crumble completely. She moved through the darkness with practiced ease, setting down her bag, slipping off her shoes. Even these small gestures seemed choreographed now, as if she'd rehearsed them for an audience I couldn't see. I lost track of time. The storm, the roads were flooded. Another lie, small and precise, joining the collection I'd been gathering like seashells on a beach. I knew the resort's paths hadn't flooded. I'd walked them myself during her absence, each step echoing with questions I wasn't ready to ask. "Do you remember our first anniversary?" I asked suddenly, surprising us both. "That tiny Italian restaurant in Chicago? You wore that red dress you'd saved 3 months to buy, and we could barely afford the wine, but you said it didn't matter because we had forever ahead of us." She stilled, one hand resting on the back of a chair. In the darkness, I could almost pretend she was still that young woman, full of dreams and honest love. "Jack, I saw you today," I continued, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "Before the storm broke, by the Marine Center." Her sharp intake of breath was barely audible over the sound of waves. "I told you I had plans. You were with him. Mark." His name felt like broken glass in my throat. "He touched your face, Sarah, the way I used to touch your face." Silence stretched between us like a tightrope. Through the glass floor panels, moonlight rippled across the water below, casting shifting shadows that seemed to dance with our unspoken truths. "It's not," she began, then stopped. Even in the darkness, I could see her hands twisting together, a nervous habit from our early dating days that now felt like watching a stranger wear my wife's skin. "You don't understand. Then help me understand." I leaned forward, grateful for the darkness, hiding the tears I could feel burning behind my eyes. "Help me understand why my wife is wearing a bracelet I didn't give her, spending money from an account I didn't know existed, becoming someone I don't recognize." The confession hung in the air between us, and I watched the precise moment she realized I'd been in her suitcase. Instead of anger or denial, her shoulders slumped with what looked like relief. "I never meant." She sank into a chair, her face catching a sliver of moonlight. "Sometimes life offers you a different path, and you don't even realize you're taking it until you're already lost. Are you lost, Sarah? Or are you finally found?" She turned to me then, and for the first time in days, her gaze met mine without flinching. In the depths of her eyes, I saw something that terrified me more than any admission of guilt. I saw purpose, certainty, the look of someone who had made a decision long before this moment. "I need time," she whispered, but the words felt rehearsed, as if they were just placeholders for harder truths yet to come. "To figure things out, to understand what I want." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Here, in this paradise we'd dreamed of for 20 years, my wife was asking for time to decide if she wanted to keep loving me. Instead, I found myself standing, moving to the deck's edge where the night air felt thick enough to drown in. "When did I lose you?" I asked the darkness. Was it gradual like erosion, or was there a moment, one specific instant when you looked at me and saw a mistake instead of a husband? Her silence was answer enough. Below our villa, the black water stirred with unseen movement. Sharks, perhaps, hunting in the night. I wondered if this was how their prey felt in those last moments, suspended between what was and what would be, knowing the teeth were coming but powerless to stop them. "I'm going to sleep on the couch," she said finally, gathering clothes from her suitcase with trembling hands. I watched her select that new black dress, the one with the price tag that told its own story of deception, and fold it carefully over her arm. As she moved toward the bathroom, I caught the glint of metal at her wrist. The bracelet. She was wearing it now, openly, like a declaration of war against 20 years of memories. That night, I lay awake listening to her breathing from across the room, remembering how we used to fall asleep tangled together, our heartbeats finding the same rhythm. Now, even sharing the same space felt like an act of violence. Each breath a reminder of promises crumbling like sand castles at high tide. Morning arrived like a held breath, the air heavy with unspoken words. I watched dawn paint our villa in shades of gold, each ray of sunlight revealing another crack in the foundation of our life together. Sarah had already left, her empty coffee cup in the sink the only evidence she'd been there at all. Even her pillow on the couch bore no indentation, as if she'd never really slept there. I found myself touching things she'd touched, her coffee cup, her book left open on the deck chair, her scarf draped over the bathroom door. Each item felt like a piece of evidence in a crime I couldn't quite name, artifacts from a life that was slipping through my fingers like water. The resort's breakfast pavilion buzzed with happy couples, their joy feeling like a personal accusation. A woman at the next table laughed at something her husband said, and the sound pierced me like a physical wound. When had Sarah last laughed with me that way? I couldn't remember, and that realization hurt more than any suspicious text or unexplained absence. My phone buzzed with a message from her. Gone diving with the group. Don't worry about lunch. The casual dismissal of our usual routine felt deliberate now. Each missed meal, another small death in our marriage. I scrolled through our recent messages, watching our communication dissolve from loving paragraphs to terse updates, like watching a time-lapse of a flower wilting. Near the beach, I spotted Mark alone, making a phone call. His face was turned away, but his body language spoke volumes. The intimate tilt of his head, the way his free hand gestured as if touching someone who wasn't there. I knew without hearing that he was talking to my wife. 20 years of marriage had taught me her rhythms, the way she inspired certain movements in people who loved her. The revelation didn't hurt as much as I expected, perhaps because I'd been carrying the knowledge like a stone in my chest for days, letting it grind against my heart until the pain became familiar. What hurt more was remembering our last anniversary, just 3 months ago. Sarah had cried during her toast, speaking about destiny and soulmates. Had she been thinking of him, even then? Had every word been a rehearsal for this moment? I spent the afternoon in our villa, surrounded by the evidence of our shared life. Photos on her phone's lock screen, her wedding ring left carelessly by the sink, the matching swimsuits we'd bought for this trip back when paradise still meant something pure. Each item seemed to hold a different weight now, like props in a play where I'd mistaken the act for reality. The sun was setting when she finally returned, her hair still damp from the ocean, carrying that new confidence that I'd come to associate with her time away from me. She paused when she saw me sitting in the darkness of our room, as if I were the stranger here. "We need to talk," she said softly, and those 4 words carried the weight of 20 years, of countless promises made and broken, of a future crumbling before it could begin. About Mark? I kept my voice steady, though my hands shook as I reached for the glass of water beside me. Or about the money you've been moving from our savings? Or maybe about the life you've been building while I watched our old one die. She sank into a chair, her face catching the last light of day. For a moment, she looked like the girl I'd fallen in love with, vulnerable, real, present. But then she squared her shoulders, and I watched my wife disappear behind the mask of whoever she'd become. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she whispered, though we both knew that was a lie. There is no good way to destroy a life built on decades of trust. No gentle way to admit that love has become a performance, that loyalty has become negotiable. When? The question escaped before I could stop it. When did I stop being enough? She flinched as if I'd struck her, and I saw tears gather in her eyes. But were they for me, for us, or for the guilt she carried? I couldn't tell anymore. Every expression seemed to hold multiple meanings, like a language I'd forgotten how to read. "It's not that simple," she began, but I cut her off with a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Isn't it? 20 years, Sarah. 20 years of memories, of building a life together, of planning for a future that apparently only I believed in. How many of those years were real? How many moments did I cherish while you were already looking for an escape?" The silence stretched between us like a living thing, feeding on our shared pain. Outside, the sun finally surrendered to the horizon, plunging our paradise into darkness. In that moment, watching shadows claim my wife's face, I realized tomorrow would bring a truth I wasn't ready to face, a revelation that would either end us or reveal we'd been ended long ago. The morning light felt different somehow, sharper, more accusing. I stood on our villa's deck watching the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of fire, knowing that by sunset, our world would be irreversibly changed. Sarah's side of the bed remained untouched. She'd spent the night somewhere else entirely, not even bothering with the pretense of the couch. My fingers traced the edge of her wedding ring, abandoned on the bedside table like a discarded shell. 20 years of promises contained in a simple gold band, now just another prop in the elaborate performance our marriage had become. The weight of it in my palm felt wrong somehow, too light to carry so many memories. When she returned, it was with the quiet determination of someone who had already moved beyond the moment we were living in. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, armor against the conversation to come. The bracelet from Mark caught the morning light, no longer hidden, but worn like a declaration. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice steady in a way that made my stomach turn. "And I need you to just listen." I sat in one of the deck chairs, gripping the armrests as if they could anchor me against the tsunami I knew was coming. The ocean breeze carried the scent of her new perfume, the one she'd started wearing for him. "I'm leaving," she began, each word falling like stones into still water. "Not just a resort, not just you. I'm leaving our life." The words hung in the air between us, rearranging the world with their simple brutality. Somewhere, a seabird called out, the sound sharp against the sudden silence. "Mark and I." She paused, touching the bracelet like a talisman. "It started 8 months ago, at that medical conference in Boston. But it's not just an affair, Jack. He represents a different life, a different future. One I've realized I've always wanted." Each word carved new wounds, but I remained silent, watching a gecko skitter across our deck railing. Nature's small dramas continuing despite our personal apocalypse. "I've accepted a position at his hospital in Singapore," she continued, her professional tone making it sound like just another business meeting. "The paperwork is already done. The apartment is leased. Our accounts." Here, finally, her voice wavered. "I've already transferred my share. Everything's been arranged." The clinical precision of her betrayal stunned me more than the betrayal itself. While I'd been wrestling with suspicion and heartbreak, she'd been executing a carefully orchestrated exit strategy. The tickets, my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. This whole trip, were purchased with separate accounts. One way for me. She sat in the chair opposite me, perfectly composed except for the slight tremor in her hands. I wanted one last perfect memory before destroying everything we built. The laugh that escaped me sounded like breaking glass. One last performance before the curtain falls? It wasn't all a performance. For the first time, real emotion cracked through her facade. The love was real, Jack. For so many years it was real. But people change. Dreams change. I changed. While I remained the same, I stood, needing to move, to breathe air that wasn't shared with her. The faithful husband. The constant fool who believed in forever while his wife planned her escape. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said softly, and somehow her gentleness hurt more than anger would have. "That's what makes this harder. You were everything I thought I wanted, until I realized I wanted something else entirely." The truth of our situation hit me with physical force. This wasn't a discussion or a negotiation. This was a notification of decisions already made, lives already separated, futures already divided. While I'd been gathering evidence like precious shells on a beach, she'd been dismantling our life with surgical precision. "When?" The question emerged as barely a whisper. "Our flight is tomorrow morning. Early." She stood, smoothing her dress with practiced grace. "Mark's arranged everything. The resort already has my checkout information." The casual efficiency of it all, the planned departure, the coordinated escape, made my knees buckle. I gripped the deck railing, feeling the rough would bite into my palms, needing the physical pain to anchor me against the psychological devastation. 20 years, I managed. 20 years of memories, promises, shared dreams. Did any of it mean anything? She moved toward me then, her hand reaching out before stopping short of touching me. It meant everything, until it didn't. The cruelty of her honesty left me breathless. Through the glass floor panels, I watched tropical fish swim in patterns that suddenly seemed meaningless, bright colors blurring as tears finally came. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though we both knew the words were inadequate against the magnitude of her actions. "I never meant to." "To what?" I turned to face her fully. "To plan our dream vacation as cover for your escape? To play the loving wife while orchestrating our destruction? To make me fall in love with you all over again while you were falling in love with someone else?" She had no answer. In the distance, Another happy couple walked along the beach, their laughter carrying across the water like a mockery of everything we'd lost. Or perhaps everything I'd lost. Sarah's expression suggested she'd found rather than lost something in this paradise of betrayal. Time becomes elastic in the aftermath of devastation. Seconds stretch into eternities, then collapse without warning. I watched Sarah pack with efficient movements, each carefully folded item a deliberate act of separation. The black dress, his gift, handled with particular care. The sight of it made my throat close. She'd left me our villa, choosing to spend her final night in paradise elsewhere. The gesture felt less like kindness and more like the final severing of a limb. Her perfume lingered in the bathroom, mixing with the salt air in a way that made me nauseated. I found myself cataloging the small traces of her that would soon vanish. A long dark hair on the pillow, the indent of her book on the deck chair, a forgotten earring by the sink. The resort continued its cheerful parade of happiness around me, oblivious to the collapse of my world. Honeymooners walked hand in hand along the beach. Children splashed in the infinity pool. A couple renewed their vows at sunset, their promises carrying across the water like knives. Every glimpse of joy felt like a personal attack, a reminder of what I'd lost, or perhaps never really had. Night fell with cruel indifference. I sat in darkness, surrounded by the evidence of our shared fiction. Photos on my phone became torture devices. Sarah at Christmas, laughing as she opened her gift. Sarah on our last anniversary, raising a glass to forever. Sarah just days ago, pretending to love me on this very deck. Each image now required reinterpretation, like paintings revealed to be forgeries. The magnitude of her deception revealed itself in waves. 8 months of careful planning. Separate accounts I'd never known about. A new life constructed in the shadows of our marriage, brick by careful brick, while I remained blind to the architecture of betrayal. The precision of it was almost admirable, like watching a master surgeon excise a tumor, except I was the growth she'd needed to remove. Sleep came in fragments, each awakening bringing fresh waves of realization. The Christmas bonus she'd insisted on managing. The work trips that had grown more frequent. The subtle changes in her wardrobe that I'd attributed to normal evolution rather than transformation for another man's eyes. Every memory now required reassessment, every shared moment questioned for authenticity. Around 3 in the morning, I found myself methodically reviewing our last real conversation before this trip. She'd been excited, almost giddy, planning our activities. "We'll make memories that last forever," she'd said. The irony of it crushed my chest until breathing became an active struggle. She'd been planning memories all right, just not the kind I'd imagined. Dawn arrived like an unwanted guest, insisting on illuminating a world I no longer recognized. Through the glass floor panels, fish swam in patterns that seemed suddenly sinister, their movements reminiscent of her calculated choreography. Had she rehearsed her confession? Practiced her explanations in front of mirrors until they sounded reasonable? A message appeared on my phone. Meeting with resort management at 9 to handle the separation of charges. Even now, she maintained that efficient professionalism that had once seemed like strength but now felt like a weapon. I wondered if she'd used the same tone to arrange her new life with Mark. Calm, collected, discussing the dismantling of 20 years like a business transaction. The morning light revealed small things I'd missed in the chaos of revelation. Her wedding ring had left a pale band on her finger, now tanned around it. She'd been removing it, I realized, practicing for this moment, testing how it would feel to no longer be my wife. Even her tan lines told stories of deception. I found myself touching the walls of our villa, tracing the patterns of light on water, trying to memorize the details of this place that had transformed from dream to nightmare. Paradise, I was learning, could be the cruelest setting for devastation. Every beautiful view now felt like a backdrop for betrayal. Every perfect sunset a witness to destruction. In the distance, I could see other couples starting their days, their happiness a mockery of my new reality. A woman's laugh carried across the water, and for a moment, It sounded so much like Sarah's that my body responded before my mind could remind it of the truth. These phantom echoes, I realized, would be my companions now, the ghosts of a life I'd thought was real, haunting me in paradise. The last morning in paradise arrived with cruel splendor, the sun painting the lagoon in shades of gold that seemed to mock my colorless world. I stood on my villa's deck, watching dawn erase the stars from a sky that had witnessed the death of 20 years of promises. In the distance, a seaplane approached, carrying Sarah and Mark to their new life, while leaving me stranded in the wreckage of our old one. The resort staff moved around me with practiced sympathy, their eyes avoiding mine as they processed the separate bills, arranged my extended stay, cleared away the evidence of her presence. They'd seen this before. I realized paradise wasn't immune to destruction. Perhaps it invited it, the perfection of the setting making imperfect hearts restless. I found traces of her everywhere. A forgotten hair tie under the bed, the lingering scent of her shampoo on a towel, a single earring that had rolled beneath the dresser. Each item felt like a shard of our shattered life, too sharp to hold, but too precious to discard. The morning light caught the edge of her wedding ring, still lying abandoned on the bedside table where she'd left it, a perfect circle now broken by absence. The final message arrived as I watched her seaplane disappear into the horizon. I've arranged for the divorce papers to be ready when you return. The lawyers have everything prepared. I truly am sorry, Jack. The precision of her planning struck me anew. While I'd been dreaming of paradise, she'd been orchestrating its destruction with architectural precision. I spent that day walking the beaches we'd shared, each footprint in the sand a memorial to moments that now required reinterpretation. The spot where we'd watched the sunset together, her head on my shoulder, planning a future she'd already abandoned. The restaurant where she'd held my hand across the table, smiling at our waiter while harboring secrets that would destroy us. The stretch of beach where I'd photographed her laughing in the surf, her eyes already focused on a horizon that didn't include me. As evening approached, I found myself at the resort's bar, not drinking but watching other couples live out their own versions of paradise. A honeymooning pair exchanged besotted glances over tropical cocktails. An older couple held hands while watching the sunset, their comfort with each other speaking of decades of genuine connection. I wondered if any of them could sense the fault lines in their own relationships, or if they too would be blindsided by betrayal in paradise. The bartender placed a water in front of me without asking, his eyes kind. Sometimes, he said in careful English, paradise shows us what we need to see, even when we don't want to see it. He'd witnessed this before. I realized the aftermath of revelations that this perfect setting seemed to inspire. Perhaps paradise had a way of making artificial things impossible to maintain, like bright sunlight revealing the flaws in a counterfeit gem. Night fell for the last time on my paradise dream, the stars emerging with indifferent beauty. I sat on the deck where just days ago I'd held Sarah, believing in the fiction of our happiness. The ocean breeze carried the scent of tropical flowers, now tinged with the bitterness of memory. Below, fish still swam in their eternal patterns, unconcerned with the human drama that had played out above them. In the darkness, I finally allowed myself to examine the truth that had been trying to surface since her revelation. Our marriage had been over long before we reached this paradise. Perhaps that's why she'd chosen this setting for its funeral. Paradise had a way of making even endings beautiful if you looked at them from the right angle. The moon rose over the water, casting a silver path across the waves. Nature's reminder that even the darkest nights contain paths forward. I touched my bare ring finger, feeling the phantom weight of promises that no longer bound me. In the distance, music drifted from another couple's celebration, the sound carrying across the water like an echo of happiness yet to come. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of rebuilding a life without her. The practical concerns would need attention: lawyers, finances, the mechanics of untangling 2 decades of shared existence. But for now, I sat in the darkness of Paradise Lost, understanding finally that some endings are also beginnings, disguised as devastation. The night air carried the scent of possibility beneath its tropical sweetness. Not hope, not yet. The wound was too fresh for that. But perhaps something equally valuable. The recognition that survival itself is a form of triumph, and that paradise, like love, exists in many forms. Some we lose, some we find, and some we must build for ourselves from the ruins of what we thought we knew. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.